Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here with another one of your questions about work. And we have talked around the subject of people who feel like they may need something in order to do the job in front of them, a skill, an experience, something to get others to be credible, to think that they're credible. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work, and we answer your questions about work. And we love when founders in whom we have had the privilege to invest join us. And Devshi started and is the CEO of JusticeText, which provides software that makes the criminal justice system more just. And I'll let her describe how they do that. And so today, and Devshi, thank you for being here today. The question is, as a leader, and you're a leader who started out, with needing to build experience in a range of different areas, how do you compensate for whatever skills you feel you need and lack?
Definitely. Well, thanks for having me on, Roy. As you said, I started an organization called JusticeText that's working with public defenders and helping them go through hours of body cam footage, jail calls, interrogations, and actually make sense of that data. And I think I've been actually reflecting on this question quite a bit recently because in the earliest days of starting a venture, school project, club, organization, startup, whatever it may be, you really don't have the privilege to hire folks who are specialized in areas that don't lie within your core set of strengths. And so you kind of have to do everything. And with that,
Great insight, by the way, just to pause you for a second. Most people assume that the best way is to hire an expert, and your recognition that in the beginning, sometimes you can't, is really powerful, just to start with that. But sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no, I just remember the earliest days, the biggest milestone for us was getting $1,000 grant. So we could actually get our landing page up and running, register as an actual organization, be compliant from a tax perspective, and just keep things rolling. And so thinking about hiring someone or even bringing on an intern for the summer was kind of out of the equation in the earliest days. And so kind of in that stage of starting any big idea, I would say one of the most important decisions you can make is who you're starting it with. Of course, there's incredible solo founders out there, but for me, the decision to work with Leslie as my co-founder was absolutely critical to the early days of JusticeText. And we both met in school. We were studying computer science together, took classes, did a database class. We got an A in it, so we knew that we could work well together. But at the same time, I would say we are very different people and have very different skills. I would say not only are our skills complementary, but our dispositions are as well. He is a brilliant, engineer. He loves thinking about, technically complex problems, cultivating a great engineering culture, finding ways to motivate our technical hires. And that's the stuff that he thrives in. For me, I was really drawn to the social justice aspect of why we were doing this work. I love speaking with public defenders, with advocates in the field, speaking with potential investors who can come on board and take our mission to the next level.
We enjoyed it too.
And I think it was actually really helpful to have such complementary skill sets in the early days because we had limited resources. And so from getting to 0 to 1 to getting our MVP out into the universe, I think that was absolutely critical. But now that we are in a different position of scaling JusticeText and we have incredible investors on board, including Bloomberg Beta, now we do have more capital to be able to play around with. And I realized that there was a stage in building JusticeText where I was becoming the bottleneck. And so I feel like I had to go through a pretty fundamental mindset shift in how I think about scaling, growing, and delegating tasks that were previously within my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I think that the awareness that the way you compensate for the skills you're missing shifts depending on what resources you have. Like the visual that came to mind, I'm a terrible snowboarder, but I kind of imagine how when you're carving down the mountain, you have to shift from one leg to the other. And that shift is often a little scary because there's a moment where you're off balance as you're making that shift, where you're kind of not on neither foot. And the idea of making sure you get yourself out of the bottleneck so that you can learn some of the skills you need to learn. We call it in the startup context hiring by cell division, but I think the meta thing that I'm hearing is that there's this kind of almost scientific process of diagnosis that you were doing of what do I need? And in the beginning, well, the only way to recruit somebody in is a collaborator, a full collaborator, and Leslie, who, was, somebody you already knew, you had that both in terms of skills, but also in terms of personality. And I can say as an investor, we saw the two of you as a team as a really compelling unit. And you can just kind of read some of that stuff. So I think that's really powerful. When you think, now let me just ask you one more question, which is when you think ahead on the skills you may be missing for the phase that's yet to come, how do you think about that?
I'll give a shout out to one of my friends who I brought on in like a chief of staff role around a year ago. There was no formal recruitment process for that. It was just me calling him up one day, kind of vaguely talking about how his week was, and then letting him know that he could join me. And for him, he came from like a consulting background. Had just gotten into law school, and he said this was like the most insane application process he had ever gone through. But like I didn't have bandwidth, to run like a full-fledged hiring process. I just trusted my gut instinct and kind of went with it. And working with him made me realize that so many of the tasks that I had grown so attached to, like maintaining XYZ spreadsheet, having that CRM of public defender contacts and having an intuition of like how they are personality wise, how to engage with them, everything like that. I realized it wasn't that special. I wasn't like uniquely positioned to do it. I just hadn't spent the time in actually documenting everything and creating processes and procedures for someone else to be able to step in and really thrive. So he kind of pointed that out to me and really helped me grow as a leader. And I think that was one of the first times that I was working with someone where I was like, I feel like I'm learning something from you every single day. And this is like unlocking so many things in my own mind about how I want to grow as, the CEO of JusticeText. So after I kind of went through that experience, he was off to law school after 4 or 5 months, but it completely shifted how I thought about the next stage of scaling JusticeText. And so rather than thinking of the business as just this endless to-do list, I started actually figuring out, like what would a marketing department do if I brought someone on? What would customer success do? What of the million things that I do fall into product? And going through that exercise of like writing the first job description and actually isolating out the different elements was so amazing, because allowing people to kind of focus in on their zone of genius and do the things that come naturally to them, they grow and flourish in a way that, is just so magical to see. So
I
that
love
was my
that.
experience
I
over the
love that.
past.
I mean, what I'm hearing there is the shift from accumulating the skills yourself to designing the system that accumulates the skills and puts them to work. And I think that's a very powerful frontier, because you can, that's a system that you can just keep building and extending upon forever. So, the last thing I just want to point out for people is that the attitude of constant reflection on yourself of what you want to be learning and being open to that, including from people who work for you, is a really great thing. I mean, I remember Jeff Bezos, who complicated guy, but wrote this or shared this story of his first moment when he was able to hire executives who were better than he was in many different areas, a CFO, head of legal. And he's like, I don't know how to be a CFO. And so his first annual review cycle with them, he wrote them thank you letters for all the things he had learned from them. And I think there's something profound in that there's kind of in shifting the weight back and forth between the different feet. There's a time when you teach and a time when you learn. So I think that's really great. Anything else you want to share before we wrap?
I think the last thing that I'll say is, as someone who hasn't really had a full-time job before, I didn't recognize the importance of creating a culture around giving feedback until one of my like other team members really kind of encouraged me to do that. He kind of sat me down after the first 90 days of being at JusticeText, and we went through a much deeper dive into very nuanced interactions about like what role each of us plays in certain meetings, and like, what time we communicate certain issues. And there were just so many things that I realized that I had just adapted to that might be potential points of conflict, but never vocalized. And, as you switch from being the person who just does everything the way you want to do it and bring more people into the fold, I just know that that's something I'm going to have to get better at. So that's
Really
the last.
powerful. I love that. Thank you. And just to say, I think your story is a powerful example of this. The reason we say this is not advice is because you're not telling somebody, here's what you should do in your circumstance. You're sharing your own experience. And obviously most advice is autobiographical anyway. So we might as well just hear your experience and then people will decide for themselves what to do. So thank you, Devshi. I really appreciate it. And here's to all the continued success at JusticeText, to be continued.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.